I do want to, however, address the issue of dialogue with Iran. This is really a huge issue. President Bush initially said he would not talk to either North Korea or Iran. As a result, as I mentioned earlier, the North Koreans made a significant increase in their nuclear arsenal. He reversed himself under advice from Secretary of State Rice in 2006 and began a six-party dialogue, the other parties being the Chinese as the host of the six-party talks, China, Russia, the two Koreas, the United States, and Japan. Put a very skilled professional diplomat in charge, Christopher Hill, and as a result of that dialogue, some progress has been made. Some people think it isn't enough, and interestingly enough, President Bush's major critics on that are former members of his own administration on the right, like John Bolton, who have called it a sellout. Nonetheless, the North Koreans turned over 18,000 pages of documents on their acquisition and use of plutonium to the United States last week. Those are now being analyzed by the intelligence community, and based on that judgment, the President will decide whether to proceed down the road towards a progress with North Korea. On the other hand, he has still not done anything in regard to Iran. He still insists on talking to Tehran through two channels, neither of which fills the needs that I mentioned in my earlier statement. First, and most important, on Iran's very dangerous nuclear programs. The United States speaks to Tehran through the voice of Javier Solana, the European Union, not quite foreign minister because they don't have one, but for purposes of this dialogue, let's say he speaks for the EU. He carries messages back and forth between Washington and Tehran. Now, many of you in this room, distinguished diplomats like David Wright, who was ambassador to NATO from Canada, Alan Gottlieb, who's here, you all know Javier Solana. He's a good man. But why, in God's name, would the greatest nation on earth, the most powerful nation on earth, think that they are somehow being stronger by having their message sent to Tehran through a European who has a different style of talking and will obviously not convey our position? The second channel is at the ambassadorial level in Baghdad, where Ambassador Crocker's not the ambassador himself, but his political counselor, that's 3 levels down, has an intermittent dialogue with the Iranians about their outrageous, murderous behavior in fueling bomb attacks, road mines against Americans. That's not a dialogue. And the position of the Republicans, including at least one of our worthy opponents here, is that any talk at all would be a sign of weakness.
Okay, well, it
is simply not true that negotiations or discussions in and of themselves represent weakness. Weakness is conveyed inside the dialogue.
Okay, let's bring
not
over
as
to
a result of talking to people.
Okay, so there's a vote for talking to Iran, but it's clear that John McCain doesn't want to talk to Iran in the same way.
Well, Lise, and with all due respect to Richard, there's no point in talking for talking's sake to a rival power which is in a position of such obvious strength at this point. The critical thing that happened when the United States made its opening to China was that China's position had been fundamentally altered strategically by the breakdown of its relations with the Soviet Union. That was what opened the opportunity for Richard Nixon. There is no comparable situation today. Nothing has changed. On the contrary, the position of Iran in relative terms, in balance of power terms, is relatively good. Economically, they have difficulties. Domestically, Iran is by no means as anti-American as other countries in the region. There is a potential, ultimately, I believe, for some kind of transformation in relations between the US and Iran, but it won't happen by Barack Obama or whoever he appoints as his Secretary of State hopping on a plane to Tehran and hoping to be welcomed with open arms. That's not how diplomacy works, Richard, and you know it.